So I want to welcome everybody back from the commercial break and to the second half of Meet the Press. There's no doubt after the lively discussion from the earlier panel that I, as moderator, just think that this is going to work by just being self-moderated. So I almost want you all to start talking yourselves. We have the great benefit of taking the analysis, taking that morning discussion about H-1Bs and the national implications for immigration policy and workforce policy, and begin to ground it to the places, to the metropolitan areas, and to the employers who are the sponsors of the H-1B visas. So we have the benefit of having 4 really distinguished guests with us today. Let me quickly introduce them. We have 2 employers on this panel, one capped and one uncapped. And that first is Leila Crawford, who is to my left, and she is the Director of International Student and Scholars representing Emory University. And Emory University is one of the largest requesters of H-1Bs in the Atlanta area. And Atlanta actually ranks 12th among metropolitan areas in its level of H-1B demand. Over on the far left is Bill Camella, who is the Senior Director of Education and Workforce for Microsoft Corporation. Again, Microsoft represents today the employer with the highest requests for H-1B workers in the country, working in the positions most filled by H-1Bs, which is in computer occupations, scientists, analysts, and in a city, Seattle, that has one of the highest overall demands for H-1Bs workers. Beyond the employers, we also have Keith Lawing, who's sitting next to Bill. And Keith is the Executive Director of the Workforce Alliance of South Central Kansas, which is a workforce investment board in that region. And he is one of those organizations that has received the ETA grant from the H-1B visa fees, so he can talk to us about how they're using those fees to grow the domestic supply of skilled workers in that region. And then lastly but not least, a good friend of the program, Sean Randolph, who's the president and CEO of the Bay Area Economic Institute, who obviously represents a very robust area. We've talked a lot about it today. Both Bay Area, represented by San Francisco and San Jose. Together, that region represents approximately 30,000 requests for H-1B workers, one of the highest concentrations of worker requests in the country. So why don't we start with a question that I want to direct to everybody, which is, you know, there's no doubt Jared has put out a challenge, which is that the H-1B visa program, that all of you, in fact, who are the major users of the H-1B visa program, is contributing to the downward pressure of wages in the country. So what I want to do is ask each one of you to respond to that and really give us a sense of the nature of your own demand for these skilled workers in terms of the types of occupations that you're being used for, how is it contributing to the competitiveness or value of your institutions in your region, and just your overall value, what your experience is with the program in general. So let's start with Leila.
My institution, Emory University, employed last year 629 H-1B employees, and that's probably about 1% of our workforce. The occupations in which we hire H-1B employees are mostly in the biological and biomedical science fields. We do have workers in health sciences and also in the physical sciences. So those would be our 3 top areas that we hire H-1B employees. They contribute mostly to our research efforts. Emory University's medical school and health sciences contributes a lot of biomedical research and health sciences research, and the H-1B employees are hired mostly in those areas. We do have a few H-1B employees in other areas, but the majority are concentrated in those fields and mostly doing research type activities.
Great. Bill, why don't we go to you on the other employer side?
This program is a critically important, though small, part of our workforce nationwide. Just to give you some stats on how important it is and the challenges we have right now in the United States. I asked our HR folks to pull our latest numbers. As of today, we've got about 5,200 job openings in the United States, of which about 3,100 are for computer scientists and computer science engineers. They start at $104,000 a year, and they also get a stock grant and a merit increase immediately. So we are having a heck of a time finding the right kinds of folks to fill those jobs. And really, it's exacerbated by the reality of some of the other numbers, Amy. We know that last year, for instance, there were 1,600 computer science PhD graduates in the U.S. Roughly 55 to 60% are foreign nationals. That leaves about 700 folks for the entire country to hire in any one year in computer science. For business, academia, and government, just isn't enough, not even close to being enough. And so our pipeline is desperately short of the kinds of workers we need. And in fact, computer scientists with the latest BLS data shows that 1 in 10 jobs in the United States now require a computer science background. So incredibly important, yet we have a real shortage in our STEM pipeline moving forward.
That's helpful. Sean?
A couple of things really resonated, Amy, in this report. It wasn't a surprise that the Bay Area has the greatest intensity of demand for H-1Bs. I think what was important to me reading it, though, was the focus on the smaller companies. I think there's a lot of identification with very large companies like Microsoft that have a need for very large numbers, and Intel and companies like that. But actually, the report shows that a lot of the demand is from very small companies, 1 and 2 requests per company. So in the Bay Area, before coming out here, I talked to a lot of companies and lawyers that work with small companies, and there were some really, I think, pretty compelling examples that the demand is coming from small and medium-sized companies, typically entrepreneurial companies, new, young, startup companies. One example, a company I talked to, 150 employees, just a couple of years old, growing as fast as they can. They're bursting at the seams. And they need people in computer science and electrical engineering. And so in the Bay Area, the growth, the demand is driven by the technology industries, and the demand is for people with degrees, bachelor's or master's typically, in computer science and electrical engineering. And they can't find them. They're looking everywhere they can. They're blind. They don't care where they get them. They're universities here around the country, and even IITs in India. They're looking wherever they can get them. About 20 to 30% of their positions right now are vacant. And they can make offers to people from H-1Bs. They hit the cap, that's dead, and they got to keep looking, but they can't find the people. So it's actually, I would think, Bill, that a large company has resources and options. Small companies that are entrepreneur-led are trying to grow. They don't have many options. I think they're the ones that are between a rock and a hard place. And I think that's where the growth in employment that we're looking for, the entrepreneurial, the innovation-based growth is going to come from. And I think that's where, for us, the biggest problem lies.
That's very helpful.
Thank you, Amy. I just want to start by thanking the Brookings Institution and the Metropolitan Policy Group for doing this report, shining attention on this issue. I want to compliment Neil and his team on the report that they did. I think it raises some excellent topics, things that we really need to look at a policy level. In Wichita, Kansas, we are the air capital of the world, and that's a pretty bold statement. We build airplanes. Use the very familiar brand names, Cessna, Beechcraft, Boeing, Learjet, and the nature of the H-1B visas that we see are in these engineering fields, manufacturing engineering. There's also a very strong R&D component at Wichita State University. We have the National Institute for Aviation Research, and actually about 70% of the research FAA does is done through NIAR. But we're not one of the larger numbers that you would see as far as the metropolitan area. It's a critical niche, and there really is a skills shortage. And that's what these employers are looking for when they're using the H-1B visa program. And I don't see that being, at least certainly in our region, any kind of downward pressure on wages because of the numbers. We're talking about 260 last year. There's still a very robust and that's a small percentage of the overall engineering professions in Kansas and in our region. So I think it's a valuable tool that's helping to drive innovation, and that's what our aviation industry is looking at right now. And these are the folks that are helping them create that innovation that's going to create future jobs and keep their businesses healthy and growing.
Could I add, Amy, on your question about driving down wages? This particular company I mentioned, their starting wage is $125,000. And so they're not looking to pay H-1Bs less than that. They'll pay them $125,000. Anybody they can get, they'll pay that much. So I don't think there's any evidence in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area that H-1Bs are driving down wages. We're probably at full employment in that sector, and that's the issue right now. And I think, frankly, on a national level, 85,000, well, there are undoubtedly cases that would prove the rule that these are being used to drive down wages, but 85,000 in the sea of national employment is a drop in the bucket. I don't believe, I know in our region it's not driving down wages. I can't see how, other than on a micro company by company level, it's really going to have that kind of impact.
Yeah, and I think this conversation already reinforces why this is so important and different at a regional scale, the nature of the labor market test. And so I want to come back to that. But I want to touch a little bit on the immigration implications first before we have a robust conversation about skills. You know, a lot of the, you know, in a global economy, we talk about the mobility of talent. And I think Vivek even said this morning that firms really need to be able to tap now a global labor force. And that's what I think H-1B represents, is that there's an enormous demand for labor regardless of the border. And we're tapping global supply. Yet, we're in a U.S. housing market that, as Jill mentioned, is actually putting a real damper on mobility because of the housing situation. A lot of folks are kind of locked into the mortgages they're in. So when I hear, you know, Sean talk about the fact that a lot of small firms have a real hard time tapping workers, they're going to be stuck mostly from a regional labor market unless they can really pull that supply from somewhere else. So what I'm really curious about is, let's talk about mobility for a minute. Given your experience with H-1B, the much more internationalized workforce that you have, how does it change your position about immigration policy so that you can continue to be on the cutting edge? Do you each, as organizations or as a region, have a position about the immigration debate so far? And open up to any one of you.
No. Go ahead, Sean.
From a regional standpoint, I think hard to speak for the region, but business economic development groups would have the perspective that the cap needs to be addressed. I think we would say also that we need to look at the limitations on green cards. That these people are already in the country. They're graduating with advanced degrees. Many of them would love to stay here, and we know in our own region there's an amazing record of how many world-famous companies and less than world-famous companies have been founded by people who came through our universities and went to work in research labs and founded companies and became venture capitalists. And it led to tens and tens of thousands of people being employed in Silicon Valley. And so I think that the question of the pipeline through the green card process needs to be addressed along with this. This doesn't get us to the education issue domestically. I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute. But I think we would feel that we need to address both of those issues.
Leela, do you have a thought on this, given the fact that you work with international students all the time?
Yes. Well, as you know, academic institutions are not subject to the cap. And so in terms of the supply of H-1Bs, that's not necessarily an issue for us. But in terms of moving our students, international students, into the workforce, I think the issue is very real. We, even in our own workforce, in terms of the H-1Bs that we employ, the idea of them not being able to get green cards is a real problem for us as well. And we see a lot of them who really want to stay, and we really could use their talent, their skills at the university going back home because of the length of time that it takes to get a green card. And so that's a real issue for us as well, the whole green card issue.
Great. Bill?
Yeah, there's no question that it's having a huge impact at Microsoft and around the country at our year. And I should have started by complimenting Neil and Jill as well, because this really is groundbreaking work. And it shows how important this program is to a wide variety of industries across the country. But at the end of the day, if we are being hamstrung by the fact that because of government inefficiency, we lost 300,000 green cards. These folks should have their green cards. This wouldn't add one new person into the United States, but in fact, there are 300,000 green cards that were backlogged that the government could not process in a timely fashion, and these workers, as Professor Wadwa says, are left in limbo for far too many years. That's why the per-country bill is so important. A number of other pieces of legislation in play right now on the Hill that are bipartisan in nature. Again, Professor Wadwa mentioned the Start of Visa Act. These are bills that are sponsored by folks like Jerry Moran, Marco Rubio, Senator Coons from Delaware, Senator Warner from Virginia. Very much a bipartisan group of senators who are now looking at these challenges, because if we don't, then we do run the risk of making it too difficult for folks to stay here. We know that wages are increasing exponentially in China and India. We know that those settings are becoming more hospitable. And so unless we deal with our policies on the front end, we will be as aggressive as we can. Commend you to look at our testimony from last July, where we talked about these issues before Senator Schumer's subcommittee. We know this is one of the most critical issues facing our country if we don't have the right talent to move forward. Lastly, on portability, because Jared raised it and I wanted to just briefly touch on it. We absolutely support portability for workers. As soon as you decide you can find another job someplace else, great. You shouldn't have to go to the back of the line. You should retain your place in the line. That's unfortunately part of the current law. We, as do many other tech companies, support removing that barrier moving forward.
Well, and just touch on this real quick. As a local workforce investment board, we view our primary customers employers, and we want to help them with to get the talent they need in their businesses. So as far as any immigration policies, H-1B visas, our position would be to make it as flexible as possible to help meet that employer demand. And again, anecdotally, I know of many cases to where when the auto industry started to cave before the Great Recession, there were a lot of aviation companies trying to recruit talent from Detroit, but again, those workers did not have the flexibility to get out of their mortgages, to relocate. And so I don't think our employers are that interested as to where they get the talent as long as they can get it.
That's interesting. Yep.
One footnote, too, that we hear even from some of our companies, like even federal laboratories that aren't subject to caps, it's the prohibition on spouses working. There are a lot of educated people who come here who have educated spouses, and it's a major hardship for them to come and stay here and work if their spouse can't work.
It's very interesting. So let me go back. Let's attack this issue about labor market test directly. I think we often hear that there is a true skills shortage in a lot of regions around the country, but it's hard to get the data to demonstrate this. And yet we also know that even while workers maybe, or regions and employers are applying for H-1Bs, there's a simultaneous effort to really grow that pipeline of skilled workers. So let me start off with Keith. You are a workforce investment board. You swim in data all the time. Tell us in Wichita, Kansas, which, by the way, I think most of us know are aware that there's been a lot of tumult in the aviation industry in Kansas with the decision by Boeing, the potential conversation with Beechcraft's ownership. Is that changing the demand for skilled workers in that region because of these changing economic dynamics? And what's your sense of the skills shortage? You have numbers on that. Why don't you answer that first, and then I'll follow up with you on what you're doing to fill that.
Well, what we're seeing, again, I think within manufacturing certainly, and I think industries across the board, is the impact technology is having on the workplace. You're going to need fewer people doing touch labor jobs because technology is making that process much more efficient. And so what we are seeing, we've had over 15,000 people laid off from the aviation industry since 2009. And there are employers that are hiring, but they're hiring for a specific skill niche. You know, the use of composite materials is replacing sheet metal. And so there's a whole different skill set that is needed in terms of how you manufacture it, how you put it in place, how you test it. And that's really what we are seeing, and that's what's changing the dynamic. The reality of the situation is that getting back to full production in the aviation industry in Wichita will happen over the next few years, but it's going to occur with fewer workers. But the workers there have a higher skill set required by those employers. And so that's really what we're seeing. I mean, you know, we've got an unemployment rate in Kansas that is below the national average, but within our region, it is at the national average and pretty much has been during the past couple of years. So we're a little anomaly, you know, as far as Kansas goes overall, just in terms of our pocket. But that is, to me, what we're trying to take on is how we can better prepare these job seekers to update their skills to help meet that labor demand. And it's a very real thing. Yep. You know, my office is at a workforce center, and so I see a lot of people all the time that struggle with this, and again, we're trying to give them the tools to get rid of those barriers.
Yep, and it's really, you know, it's just a real good reminder that we can have a high unemployment rate and a skills mismatch at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're revealing. Give us a sense of, you're one of the recipients of the ETA grant that is funded by the H-1B visa fees. How are you using that ETA grant to fill the skills gap then, particularly around STEM fields, given the mission of the program?
Our project is called, and Neil had a slide up earlier, the Kansas Engineering Excellence Program, KEEP. We love our acronyms. And you know, where we usually operate as a workforce investment board are the lower rungs on a career ladder. With our Workforce Investment Act funds, we also have a national emergency grant that was invested into the region to help us deal with the large number of layoffs. And so the KEEP grant is letting us complement those efforts and build a stronger continuum. We certainly are going to need more production workers, and with a different skill set than what they previously had in the marketplace. And we've been able to address that very robustly and helping a lot of people get back to work, even with these conditions. What we're able to do with the grant from the H-1B visa fees are focus on the higher end of the career ladder. And particularly in partnership with a group of employers and the National Institute for Aviation Research and the College of Engineering, we have the ability over the next 4 years to work with 100 people and target bachelor's degrees, but also master's degrees and PhDs. And this is where we're seeing some of the demand in the engineering fields. It's that higher level, and it's creating the innovation that is going to spur job growth at the production level. So this gives us a chance to really take a stronger continuum in our approach. And another aspect of an element of this grant is that we have the ability to help people with work experience opportunities. I think Neil in the report mentioned one of the challenges at the bachelor degree level, too many folks are still lacking work experience, and that's keeping them from being hired. Through our grant, we're able to plant interns, part-time workers within companies while they're studying for that bachelor's degree, which we hope will, and we're confident will, help make them very strong candidates when they complete that degree.
Great. And then I think for the rest of you, what we all know also from the data is H-1Bs really do represent just a very small share of the overall workforce, and particularly within your own companies or regions. So that means, for the most part, we're still really reliant on a domestically sourced workforce. So what are each one of you doing to contribute or try to grow the supply of skilled workers so that you're not always having to turn to H-1Bs as your backup plan, so if you will? So let me ask, Bill, you're doing a lot of work in this space.
Yeah, Washington State is where we're headquartered, outside of Redmond, Washington. Believe it or not, Washington State has the 4th most STEM jobs in the U.S. and the 4th least STEM graduates. So we have an incredible mismatch, even in a state where you've got companies like Amazon and Real Networks and Starbucks and Boeing and many others. So a huge mismatch. So we'll get together, and I think one of the things moving forward is, as we look to shrinking government, how do we create better public-private partnerships? So we work with our great governor, Governor Gregoire, and other companies in our state, and we set up last year a $100 million STEM scholarship program in the state that we hope in the next 10 years will grow to $1 billion. And it's for young people who are eligible for free and reduced price lunches, because as you all know, one of the great challenges in the STEM field is bringing in underrepresented minorities and also women into the fields. And so we're really focusing on that both at a Washington state level, but quite frankly around the country. We spend about $30 million in STEM-related work. We've got 16 FTEs that's all they do is try to encourage folks to get into STEM fields, young women, especially in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, telling them it's not just about programming. We did all the work with James Cameron, for instance, on Avatar. So you can start working on projects like that. You can really tackle some of the millennium challenges around food and water and communications and health. This is really what technology is about today. It is about solving the great challenges of the world. And that's what we're trying to convince young people to do through various programs, is to, in fact, let them realize, number one, that they can really make a difference. They will be paid extremely well. And these are the fastest growing sets of jobs, according to the BLS, in the nation.
Great.
I think there are some fundamental structural problems in our pipeline for STEM workers. And in our region, just a couple of examples, at the high end, HP has a very high-end nanotech laboratory, about 100 PhD scientists. Of those, 95 to 98 are from other countries. And they say they would love to hire any American they can, but they can't get Americans to apply. And so they're from everywhere in the world but the United States. The San Jose State University, state institution, is the single largest generator of bachelor and master's level engineering students in Silicon Valley and in California. About 7,000 a year graduate. And it's sort of the workforce, the day-to-day workforce of a lot of Silicon Valley. So a distressingly large number of the freshman entrants there have to have remedial English and math training before they can even begin to function as a freshman. This is coming out of our high school system. The high school system has an appalling number of dropouts in Silicon Valley for San Jose. And so you've got that pipeline coming in. And then of the students who begin the engineering program, a very large percentage drop out before completing their degrees. I think PCAST has come out with a number, I think 40% nationally of the students who begin science and engineering programs as freshmen drop out before they finish those degrees. And so when you look at that pipeline, the pipeline isn't there, or it's a very broken pipeline. And so there are issues in how we incentivize people. I think the engineering people in San Jose State say, well, the students say it's hard work. It's really hard. They may not have the attractive salaries when they get out. And so a lot of them drift off. But I think some of the answer has got to be with our educational system per se, and some, I think, with what Bill mentioned, that public-private partnerships, companies like Hewlett-Packard and IBM, major programs in schools, K through community college, and I think a lot of the answer must be, certainly in California, community colleges. There are programs where, for example, Genentech works with Skyline Community College across the road to identify the skills they're going to need. They contribute equipment to the community college, and they develop a pipeline that way. And now there's a new effort in California, very young, but I think it's the right direction, where all these community colleges, of which there are many, many, 50 maybe, I don't know, about that number, they are all atomized. They work with employers locally, but they don't collectively work together. And now, for the first time, they are starting to organize statewide on an industry basis. What does the IT sector need? What does the biotech sector need? But it's the connection to the employers to understand the pipeline and develop the targeted training programs that the employers will need a year or two down the road.
So I was going to do a follow-up question to the three of you right now before I turn it over to Leela. And what had said when we prepared for this panel, I said I did not want to have a huge conversation about workforce policy because that is in another forum in and of itself. But it's hard not to have that conversation when we're talking about the need for skilled labor, particularly around STEM fields. So just let me stick to this conversation then. And I'm going to turn a little bit to Bill, but ask the three of you anyway, because Bill has had, I think, 17 years of experience both in Congress and in the Department of Labor working on workforce issues. We have a workforce intermediary at the regional scale. I do think that most folks believe that in order to fill this gap, we need to have more better alignment between industry and the education and workforce system. And we're seeing an enormous amount of experimentation between employer-sponsored or industry-driven solutions around community colleges, career tech high schools, and other things. But they are a lot of one-off innovations. Microsoft is going to do their own training. FedEx is going to partner with their own community college. And maybe that's okay region to region because of the different challenges within each regional market. But is there a way to better scale these regional public-private partnerships around skills? Because I don't think we have it as strongly aligned as we can across the country. Any thoughts on how to make this more the norm, how to simplify existing policies, either at the state, federal level, to really encourage the demand-driven approaches to these gaps?
Want to start? Go for it. Oh, okay, make it the easy ones. I think, number one, you touched on it, around the skills mismatch. What we found, for instance, is most folks don't have time to get a 4-year degree anymore if they've been dislocated from their current job. And we're talking about millions of folks, unfortunately, in that situation. What we have seen is the great rise in certifications and professional certifications of a wide variety, industry-recognized certifications. We call them portable job credentials. You can work in Seattle, Washington, or in Savannah, Georgia. And what we've seen is community colleges really taking the lead in this niche. 10 years ago, there were, I think, 35,000 certifications issued by community colleges. In 2010, that number was 650,000. It is greatly outstripping the number of associate's degrees that community colleges are now giving. Why? Because folks, folks need to pay for their car, they need to pay for their rent, they need to put food on the table. They can't afford to wait, oftentimes 2 to 4 years, to get the kinds of skills they're going to need to get back in the labor force. And so that's what these folks are doing. We used to think that other college meant that they dropped out after a few courses. Well, in fact, when you talk to the folks at the American Association of Community Colleges, they now know that other college meant these folks were getting very specific, industry-recognized credentials and certifications that will allow them to get into the job market much more quickly. And I think that as the system evolves, I would argue that we need to put more emphasis on those kinds of credentials moving forward, look at tax credits around that area, and look at how we're delivering these services moving forward, because the great challenge Keith faces every day, he's got twice as many people coming in the door than he can serve, or 3 times as many, or 4 times as many. Yep. So moving forward, how are we going to start delivering this service? Is it going to be through the greater use of technology, because we've got less person power to do that? And how do we do that in a joint public-private kind of way to make sure we still have the rigor, that we have the right composites in the course, that in fact employers will recognize and then hire people that Keith produces for them at their doorstep. And that's really what we're looking to do moving forward.
Let me make a quick point on our grant. The focus of our grant are individuals who've been long-term unemployed in the aviation industry, have experience, and we are trying to get them a degree or credential to help get them back. And we're also targeting women and minorities, as already been mentioned, underrepresented engineering fields. But I totally agree with Bill. We need a stronger alignment of industry-recognized credentials. As technology does change, and one of the things we've seen is engineers who've been laid off. We've been able to get them back in the workforce after they go take a certification class offered by the College of Engineering, focusing on composites or some new type of technology. So in my opinion, and from what I've seen that's worked, a better alignment of academic credentials and academic programs to industry-recognized credentials that can have a quicker turnaround time, that's going to help me and the programs we operate and my other brother and sister workforce investment boards around the country do a better job of limiting the skills gap.
Great. Sean, did you want to jump in?
I'd only add that I think we have two levels. We've got the pipeline coming through the conventional university system,
Yep.
People who are going to be graduating with bachelor's and master's degrees, and paying attention to that pipeline. A lot of folks may be coming out thinking there are no jobs in software technology. There's a ton of jobs in software and technology. We need to kind of make it clear that they're out there and incentivize people to stay in the programs. You know, even fundamental stuff like in California, you have to pay all teachers basically the same. You can't pay math and science teachers more. If we want to have more STEM graduates, why not pay math and science teachers more than poetry teachers? Poetry's wonderful stuff.
Or forgive their loans.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
We have to start at that level and work our way up. Once we get to the actual place where public-private partnerships come in, which are extremely important, absolutely. Closer connection to industry credentialing. And I think there's a lot of wonderful examples of what individual or companies are doing in their communities, but they tend to be one-off, like you said.
Yeah.
We need to scale those, and very often community colleges are the most efficient way to do that.
Yep.
Unfortunately, California is cutting back its community college system right now, but that's another issue.
Yeah, we're going to come back and talk about that. Let Leela jump in and speak on behalf of educational institutions and how you're trying to, I mean, again, you're using a lot of H-1Bs for life science and biomed and researchers. Right. And are you growing obviously you're growing your own talent. How are you thinking about this? We
have several programs at Emory, and colleges and universities around the country have several programs to do this because we need them as well in our own universities, where we need people in STEM fields to be professors and researchers and otherwise. And so at Emory, we have 3 different levels where we try to encourage students to go into STEM fields for education. We also have programs with faculty and also with high school teachers. A couple of programs at the undergraduate level. We have the Hughes undergraduate program in Excelling in Science. And that program, students who have been accepted at the university are asked to come in during the summer if they're interested in science. They're brought in during the summer and go through a summer program where they take courses in science, they work in labs, and they go through a career education program as well, so they understand what job opportunities are available in the field, and they work with people who are already in the field to encourage them. And once they enroll in school, the program continues with mentors and working with faculty and so forth. We also have a summer program that brings students in, that the college students who are already there will have an opportunity to work in a lab with a faculty member doing research. And so a couple of programs for students who are already in college. At the high school level, we have students who come on campus in the summer as well, who take college-level courses taught by college professors in the sciences. And again, there's efforts to engage them in career education in terms of particular fields that they might want to enter. We also, at the high school level as well as the college level, work with curriculum and faculty development in order to try to help faculty focus more on student-centered learning and also on problem solving. A lot of times I think students get turned off because science is hard, but I think if you can make it interesting to the students, more of a problem solving, student-centered focus, it makes it more interesting and students really get involved with it. And we're having success in this area. But a lot of times, I think it was mentioned in the panel previously, sometimes students get siphoned off into other areas where the basic science is required and then will not continue on to the PhD level, which is the level of skill that we need to employ at our university.
Right. So I'm going to turn over to the audience very shortly, so start thinking about questions you want to ask this panel. But let me just ask one final question to everyone. We had a robust discussion earlier today about federal policy. I'm going to put that on hold and assume that federal policy will continue to be broken. And ask about states, because I do think states really do matter when it comes to regional economies. And, you know, oftentimes this program talks about the importance of also state policies in advancing a lot of these regional dynamics, but we're also at a situation now where states are fiscally strapped. And particularly in the situation I know most about in terms of Washington and California. California is in a major budget deficit crisis. It has dramatically slashed funding for higher education and the community college system, which are the most important feeders for growing the talent, whether it's from what we've heard today from junior high school through the two-year institutions and then even through mid-career. And in Washington State, where the University of Washington has been a real partner to industry, particularly around computer science, has also seen massive cuts to their programs as a result of the state deficits. So can we turn to states at this time to be a partner in solving our skills shortage? What's your prognosis on that? You see any good innovations underway despite the fiscal situation we see in states? I'm going to start with the folks from California and Washington. Any optimism in there?
I think you have to look to states. I mean, there are still enormous resources. In California, the University of California system, the state university system, the community college system is still the largest in the U.S. There's enormous capacity there. I think part of the fiscal problem, which is an urgent reality for all these different levels, is I think they're going to need to retool. They're going to need to restructure and in some way redefine themselves, because I think the old world isn't coming back. I can't see a day in the foreseeable future when they're flush with cash again. And so that will probably require more partnership with business, with industry, more moves to online education perhaps. Maybe that enables more outreach to people who need those skills development and makes it more affordable and easier for them. So I think this has to be part of a reevaluation of how education is delivered at the state level, but I think absolutely the states have to be at the table.
Great. And think about your answers in 30 seconds so we can open up to the floor.
I think there's a great opportunity out there in the states that I think some states are moving forward. I think part of the challenge is if you're going to get kids into the STEM pipeline, we've got to figure out a way to make sure that we incentivize them properly in high school. Right now, there are only 9 states in the United States that require math and science in their core. 9. And so if we are really going to increase our STEM pipeline, state policies have to significantly change. We have to have a better AP computer science test. Right now, last year there were less than 400 African Americans in this country who took and passed the AP computer science test. Less than 400. There are over 100,000 taking the environmental science AP test. Last year at Howard University, one of the most preeminent institutions in this country, they had 17 kids line up and enroll for computer science. They had 300 going into radio and television broadcasting. So again, we've got to drive at the state level, working with institutions to say, here's where the jobs are, here's what we're going to pay, how can we partner with you? Whether it is something like the Open Learning Institute at Carnegie Mellon, where kids aren't staying in their statistics class 15 weeks, 4 times a week. They're meeting 9 weeks, twice a week. They're doing it in teams, and they're doing problem solving. So they actually remember what they learned at the end of the day. We need to do more of that in high school. We need to encourage lots of innovation, and I know that we're ready to partner with anyone who wants to partner with us. And that's what I think it's going to take. It can't be the one-offs. Right. I know the Chamber wants to bring folks together, BRT. Lots of the business trade associations here in this town are saying, what are the 1 or 2 things that business should focus on? So we are more than willing to come to that table and look forward to try to partner with any of you to do just that.
Great.
And let me just jump in real quick. States definitely have to be at the table, and they have to be a partner. And again, you do get a mixed bag because of the politics and some of those dynamics. Kansas, this last legislative session, passed a bill to support technical education. So if a high school student wants to take technical education classes, they will pay the community college or the technical college to come offer those classes to that student. If that student graduates from Kansas high school and enrolls in a technical education program at a community college, tech college, they will pay the tuition. So that's one of the things the state is doing, but at the same time, our K-12 system is suing the state because they're not giving adequate funding. So it's a mixed bag, and again, we got to figure out how we can make all that work.
Well said. you want to add to this real quick?
I just think it's a mixed bag in Georgia as well. I mean, we have some very innovative things happening, but not enough.
Yeah, great. Okay, it's your turn. So raise your hands high if you have questions, and we'll start over here. Please identify yourself.
My name's David North. I'm with the Center for Immigration Studies, which is a think tank nearby here in Washington, D.C. I have one quick comment and one quick question. My comment is that next time Brookings does something like this, I hope it's a little more balanced. There have been 11 voices up there on the stage, one of whom had some questions about the H-1B program, one of whom was neutral, and the rest of you seem to be enthralled by this program, which is, frankly, a very controversial program, and we haven't heard about the displaced workers, displaced American workers that have been created by this program. That's my comment. My question is to the gentleman from Microsoft. There is a proposal before the Congress to have the staple bill. Staple bill would involve giving green cards to people with STEM degrees, advanced STEM degrees in this country, master's, PhDs in this country. And one of the proposals suggests that there should be no employer tie. Does Microsoft favor that program?
We support a program that allows for more of the brilliant young people who come to the United States in our critically needed STEM disciplines to be able to get their green cards much more quickly. We think they should be tied to a job offer. Many of the bills on the Hill, in fact, tie to a job offer. We think it makes sense, but we don't think, as Jared mentioned, that they should be perpetually tied to that employer. They should have portability. So yes, there should be a much greater effort on the Hill to retain these brilliant young individuals, but also we should allow them portability once they've gotten their job offer and begun working in the United States.
Other questions? Go to this woman here.
Hi, I'm Teresa Esquivel de Silva. I work at U.S. Department of Labor. Hi, Neil and Bill. I used to work for Bill, or with him, when I first started at DOL, actually, and he was in the Employment and Training Administration.
I've had a very checkered past, clearly.
I'm now in international affairs, and I'm removed from this issue, but at the time, in 2000, I was on detail to Senator Kennedy's office and was working full-time on this legislation that's still in effect. And I can tell you, some things change and some things just, stay the same. These are all the exact same issues that were talked about heavily back in 2000 and before that. They had already been going on for a long time before 2000. And on the one hand, I'm very, glad about the research that Brookings has done, because it's a great contribution to what we know about it. We didn't have this kind of data, this knowledge, or any way of anticipating how the economy was going to change, how the industries, the labor market demands, et cetera, were going to change. So this is a great piece. I'd like to hear more comments from the panel about the idea of the National Commission, because that could go either way. I'd just like to highlight that at the time that this legislation was being amended, in no way, shape, or form were we under the illusion that the H-1B skills training grants were going to solve all the problems. It was sort of that was, an approach to get at what you all were talking about, the importance of public-private partnerships at a, local or regional or, collective effort, because we knew that things are happening in different ways in different parts of the country, and there was no quick fix or easy solution at a national level. It was going to require this kind of collaborative involvement. And the concern is that when you have national level lobbyists, they don't necessarily carry the same perspective and priorities or experiences as all of you do. And so back then, as I'm sure do now, there's going to be some conflict and different, push-pulls in terms of directions for even that commission. So I don't know, but what are your thoughts on that kind of approach?
My impression is from the proposal from Brookings is that the metropolitan perspective would be hardwired into that. Mm-hmm. I think that if that's the case, I think it would address your issue.
Yep. Bill, do you want to jump in as
Yes.
both on the commission, but even whether the vision of the ETA grant has really, even though it is a drop in the bucket in terms of overall workforce funds, whether it's really played out to its mission.
Yeah. And I will take part of the rap for this because I was at the Department of Labor for a number of years under both Bob Reich and Alexis Herman, and with my good friend Jared, who was on the earlier panel. And we did work on this program, in fact. Department of Labor, I think, I love the people there. It's a great bunch of individuals, but it is very much a vestige of the old OEO days. It's very much a second chance department, in my personal opinion. And so, despite the fact that there were lots of pushes and pulls and internal discussions about where we should target these dollars, many of these dollars did not go, in fact, to jobs that are part of the H-1B system. They went to help people move up the career ladder, for instance, in healthcare, starting out as a lab tech or a rad tech, and hopefully he or she then moves up to maybe be an LPA or an RN, hopefully, down the road. Great pipelines, whether it's in energy, financial services, healthcare, all beautiful things. But the original reason that the cap was lifted in 1998 was we said that those dollars would be used to mitigate dependence on foreign labor. Well, to do that, then you've got to train folks in those fields and in those occupations like Keith is trying to do in Wichita. Unfortunately, that program hasn't done enough of that. And I'll take the rap for that as much as anybody, quite frankly. But I think there is still a possibility to do that with what Jay Notes is trying to do and drive some of these grants to more demand-related fields. And I think clearly we need to do much more of that. Employers can't just give folks the money and then walk away. So we have a responsibility, I think, to be much more involved with the Labor Department, with local boards. I sit on the National Association of Workforce Boards, have done so for many years, and I'm very proud to do so. But I think all of us employers, we can't just complain about the end product if we don't get involved on the front end and talk about what kinds of skills we need and what these dollars should be used to train for moving forward.
I think part of the value of the commission idea, maybe the market test of it, is does it help bring about greater clarity and depth of understanding in an objective, neutral way about what's really going on in labor markets as they relate to visas and green cards? Because, you know, at time to time, I'll hear a fact or an allegation. I wonder about that. I don't quite understand it. I spent a fair amount of time on the Hill talking to folks on both sides of the aisle, and I've heard some completely bizarre things said with complete conviction. And I can't understand how you can believe that to be true, but you know, just coming from a completely misaligned or different perspective. And at the end of the day, it becomes inherently political. You know, this debate going on years and years and years has been, well, a lot of people, I think, at the Hill would agree that, yeah, objectively, we should have a separate treatment of H-1Bs and highly skilled immigrants, separate from undocumented and low-skilled immigrants. But then it gets into partisan trade-offs. Well, we got to have a comprehensive solution, otherwise the Republicans won't be with us, or whatever the case may be, and all gets tied up in the political horse trading. And so I don't think a commission is going to solve that. It's going to be political at the end of the day. But if a commission can bring greater clarity and better understanding of the facts, then that would be an important contribution to the process.
I totally agree, and I should have mentioned that. I think I've only been here 36 years in this town, so I know there are people in this room with far more experience in this area. I've seen a few commissions come and go. The two that I've seen work are the Social Security Commission. It was short and very focused. The other one, we could argue Bowles-Simpson, though that didn't quite work out so well at the end of the day. But many other commissions have come and gone. Very, very difficult to keep both the political bent in place, and we know darn well that different folks in this town have a political bent. And number two, can we get the right kind of timely data to allow the right kind of inputs to make those decisions? Because we make our hiring decisions based on 3-month projections. We don't do it 3 years out. We don't do it 5 years out. If a product's not selling, we terminate that line. We move to something else, and we move the people to something else. And so how do you allow for that flexibility with the right indices to get you the kinds of outputs you need at the end of the day?
Other questions? We'll do here, and then we'll probably have to wrap up soon.
Hi, Matthew Sada. Again, I'm with the Foreign Service, currently serving with Congressman Peters from Michigan. And the question I asked the last panel was just about the need to increase domestic labor mobility and how companies, will pay $10,000 in fees, not to mention the overhead costs of recruiting internationally. And what efforts are your companies making, whether it's Microsoft or other firms up here on the dais, to recruit domestically. So instead of paying, again, $20,000 to get someone from overseas, what can you do to perhaps give them some kind of break on refinancing their mortgage? Creatively, using Microsoft's credit line, for instance. What can you do to ensure that you're recruiting in the right marketplace in the United States? Like, we're spending $20,000 to recruit an overseas worker when it's really a labor mismatch within the United States. Within Washington State, you know, the fourth highest, but the fourth lowest production. What can we do? And can you talk a little bit about your domestic recruitment strategy?
We recruit in every borough and hollow in America. We know every single computer science program in the United States at the undergraduate level, many of which we contribute to. We know every single computer science professor at the undergraduate level in every institution in the United States. We have folks that spend every single day of their lives going to every campus, going to professional associations, really going anywhere using, quite honestly, social media. And a lot of affinity groups who then band together around social media to try to recruit. We'll go anywhere and everywhere. I mean, one of the big pushes right now is recruiting in the military for technical skills. We have a lot of brilliant young men and women who've served our country incredibly bravely and proudly over the last several years in Iraq and Afghanistan, who are now coming back and are having a challenge is how do they translate their technical skills in the armed forces into civilian technical skills. And so we're doing lots of work around certification and licensing at state levels, trying to make sure that these men and women can, in fact, come in because they've got great work ethics. There are going to be 1 million of them in the next 3 years, and we think many of them are, in fact, a ready pool of workers. So we spend an enormous amount of money and time and energy. We will continue to do so. But unfortunately, we still are coming up short in terms of the total numbers in our pipeline in the U.S.
Let's take this last question and then wrap up.
Hi again, Peggy Orchowski, congressional correspondent with the Hispanic Outlook on higher education. It's my understanding that H-1B had always intended to be just a temporary a gap filler until Americans were educated to fill those gaps. But it's obvious it's not happening now. But is now the solution to make those temporary visas permanent, and won't that inhibit the much, much harder and more expensive tax of getting American education up to speed? How much easier just to take the millions of kids who have already been well educated in other countries, especially India and China. So will the permanentization of these visas inhibit the other end?
We don't think so. And we talked a little bit about unemployment. The unemployment rate in the United States right now for folks in computer science and engineering is 3.1%. Most economists that I know think 4%, roughly around, and Viva could probably correct me, but we can argue about what the full employment rate, but it's real. Also, we want to convert these people, and we do it on day one, as Neil mentioned. We're one of those companies that converts our people immediately. We convert 95% of our H-1Bs to green cards to become permanent U.S. citizens. We do so because they contribute mightily to our economy, as we've heard this morning. They create more jobs. They file more patents. They create their own businesses that then employ additional Americans, and we have examples of this all over Puget Sound. So there's no question that these folks are a net asset. We need to keep more of them in the United States, but we also need to really work on growing our domestic pipeline at the same time.
Leela?
We have sort of a different approach at Emory. The H-1B has always been a dual intent visa. So a person can be an intending immigrant on the H-1B. Most of our H-1Bs are temporary at our institution. They come because we have most of our research is done on research grants that we get from the U.S. government and from private sources as well. And so the person can be there to the extent of the grant. And so, so in that sense, they are temporary. They may go on to other institutions to work on other grants, and their intent may be to become permanent. But we do hire a few of our H-1Bs in permanent capacities as well. And so we really use it as a dual intent visa.
Well, listen, that brings us to the closing of the program. I think please join me in thanking this panel, but all of our speakers from today. I think we have covered a wide diversity of topics, and I really appreciate the fact folks who have been on the webcast this entire time, and also many of you who've just stayed with us for all 3 hours this morning. Thank you for being part of this really robust discussion. Have a good afternoon.